This is Bottom Springs at the end of the 7-year drought, which finished in the 1965. The details of what occurred in that time are as follows. These were the remaining animals that had been left on the property after the 7 years of very little rain. These were all brumbies, which we mustered into the new well yards, and we took the mares and foals off and let them go, and we trucked the older horses into the station yards. And there's the mare and the foals being let go. And although it appeared that there's basically no feed left there, those animals still were in reasonable condition. Now these are the old yards at the station, built of mulga rails and posts and gum posts. They were built in Kidman's area back at the turn of the century, that's in the 19th century, and in 1965 still very workable. Ross Coop breaking some of the brumbies that we'd kept and that we didn't sell for stock horses to be used later on. And this is a general shot of the country looking south over New Well, and this is at the station itself, as you can see, absolutely devoid of any grass or feed whatsoever. And even the scrub, as you can see in that shot, the leaves have defoliated, and that's what the natives are capable of doing. They defoliate and wait for rain and then reshoot again. Some of the older ones, which are under pressure from different elements, don't survive. The younger ones did survive. But as you can see, it's very vast and very little of any of the younger or the older trees left in that rocky terrain of the rangeland. And I guess one of the important things of this lesson is that although it looks so bad, it is a natural phenomenon, and it's not unusual or uncommon for the country to be in this state. Now this is at Palmer's Camp, the area again totally devoid. A little bit of water left in the dam, of course no stock left, but as you can see looking out, absolutely nothing. This is at Scrub Well. Now that well is of some interest. It was dug during the erection of the telegraph line. It is 90 feet deep, timbered to the bottom, and virtually no water. Pretty heartbreaking in those days, hoping to get water and then going to that depth and not getting anything. This is Ulubra Dam. There'd obviously been a small storm and the catch hole was full, but as you can see, no germination had taken place anywhere in the area. And in those days, the very early stages of the rain pattern didn't generate any germination. This is in the spinifex bore, which was reasonably salty. It was interesting. The cattle that were left were actually on this bore and were doing quite well, and I'm sure it was something to do with the high salt content that the bore was providing. This is the 15-mile yards. Those yards were built by Wally Spears, actually. He also was trucking brumbies out in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. That's the new wattle yards, and some of the few cattle that were left there were 90 cattle that we mustered off the place at the end of the drought. Back to the station, that was the station powerhouse, and some of the equipment that was used to pump water from the creek when it had rained. This was Cooper Pedy, 64.5. The interesting thing about Cooper Pedy is when you drive up there now, all that country on either side of the road is been dug, and there are mounds of dirt 30, 40, 50 feet high all the way through, but in those days there was hadn't been any diggings outside of a very close area close to the town. Again, the country was in very dry condition. That drought, the 7-year drought, did occur right through the arid zone into the Port Augusta area and to Alice Springs. Jan's dad would accompany us on those trips, and he was one of the rats of Trabuc, and he made the comment of that area there that it was similar to Trabuc, devoid of anything. A pretty damning indictment on the area, but all due to basically no rain. That's Bond Springs, as you can see, absolutely devoid of anything around it. The interesting part about that shot is there's some cloud, and after 7 years of very little rain, any sort of cloud was of interest to everybody, and finally it did build up, and we did start to get storms. The total rainfall for 1964 at Bond Springs was 1 inch and 72 points. The mulga country, as it was so dry, it's interesting to see the groves very pronounced right through all the mulga country, and the first sign of any flood out and green response from the rain, that one of the first storms that we had. And that's the Stewart Highway, and again the groves are so pronounced because it's so dry and there's sort of nothing growing in between. Again, some response from the first storms. Even in the mulga, there's now some response starting to show. And those early storms were very, very heavy and vicious, and they only lasted for a very short time, the rain cells that were falling. And the runoff was very quick, so there wasn't a lot of penetration in those early storms. And in fact, they did quite a lot of damage of tearing the earth from the side of the creek banks as they tore down at great speeds. This is some of the restoration work that was done in the plant paddock, and that's can still be seen today. There's a storm and a dust storm with it, a rainstorm with a dust storm behind it, and they were very pronounced in the breakings of the drought. Those types of phenomenons of very heavy storm cells whipping up the dust behind them. You can see the creek there in flood with brown muddy water in it. The station homestead, the lawn had obviously appreciated the rain. It's showing a great green response, and there's water in the station creek for the first time for many years. and the first sign of growth from the same spot as those other shots were taken from on the high ranges behind New Well. You can see it's mulga grass, and the response has been terrific. It's in the 16 mile, and this is a paddock which the government used to experiment with some plantings of varying types of grasses. In those rains that continued in the 60s through into the 70s, there were huge rains. Bond Springs averaged 21 inches for 4 years during the 70s, and in one particular rain, it was so pronounced that the tod ran for the whole 12 months of the year, but even more than that, it ran very strongly, and no one really knew how far down it had got towards Lake Eyre, and there were some suggestions that it was going to get to Lake Eyre. So I talked to Mac Clark and Rex Lowe, Mac Clark from Andado, who lived in that area, and also Rex Lowe at Mount Dare, who lived in that area, and a chap called John Graham from Elders. The four of us flew down the Todd. We followed the Todd down past Andado, past Mount Dare Homestead, and it appeared that the water had nearly got into what they called green swamp, but that's where it stalled at that point, and it didn't get any further than that. Didn't have a long way to go before it got through to the river systems that run into Lake Eyre, but it didn't get through on that occasion. Obviously in the past it had, in thousands of years ago, it was obviously running through there, because the stumps in the sandhills which are still prevalent and can be seen, that of gum trees that grew prolifically down along the Todd back in those very earlier years. And this is the flight now, which is really into the Cooper Basin. We flew down to the top of Lake Eyre, and Kalamurna, which is very close to the northern end of Lake Eyre. You can see not only the house totally submerged, but the yards as well. We called in at Birdsville, Mac and Rex, and we camped there overnight, and the interest was the old exploration by Madigan, because Mac, of course, had done a lot of work in the drill sites out into the desert, and was aware of Madigan's tracks that had come through to the northern end of Andado. The other thing that also happened at that time was that the railway line to Alice Springs was in dire straits, because it was the old line which came through Oodnadatta, and it was subject to all these rivers that ran into Lake Eyre, which had all flowed very, very strongly, and in fact it flowed so strongly that the railway line and the bridges and the lines themselves had been washed away, and were washed away on numerous occasions. That's in the Oodnadatta area. It just looked like a sea of water. It's hard to believe in normal conditions, but there's one of the instances I'm talking about just in the sandhills, where the railway line is basically submerged from water that's fallen, and rain that's fallen in the sandhills. Great areas of water which were running in places which had never been seen by white man before. And so what was happening is that the disruption to the railway line meant that stores getting through to Alice became very varied, and they weren't sure from time to time just how long it was going to take to get the stores through, and in fact in some cases they didn't get them through, because there you can see there's the train that's been split in halves, still submerged in muddy water, and the bridge is gone there, and so at times it became quite desperate in the shops in Alice in relation to what they had on their shelves. This is again at the Bond Springs or old 16-mile airstrip. John Stanton, Jim Francis, and it was one of the many flights that we did in those days, ascertaining what the rains had done, where the rivers had flowed, etc. Again, this is on the Unadilla Alice Springs railway line, and the bridge being washed away. In those days there wasn't bitumen between Adelaide and Alice Springs, so even the trucking industry had great difficulties at the same time because of the washaways on the road. It was also at the time when Lake Eyre became filled, and the side of the railway line, which runs along the western side of the lake, had to have boulder baffling put up against the splashing of the water out of the lake to allow the train to get through, the engine to get through, because the water was with strong southeasterly winds was splashing over the line and not allowing the engine to be able to get through. And there was quite a breakwater that was built along the edge of the lake there to allow the train to continue. There's a predominance of photo shots, but after so many years of drought, it was magnificent just to see this huge amount of water which was covering the dry inland areas of Australia, and something, of course, that you don't see very often. Okay, Bill Wardby, Audrey Atwood, Jan, on our way to survey the Mount Wedge cricket oval. We had to postpone the cricket match, which was held annually every year, because of the rains. And as you can see here, there's the oval. That's Mount Wedge itself, the station, and all you can see that's sticking out of the water are the posts of the oval. It was a bit ironic because Bill had actually made some seagulls which he used to put on the oval to make it more authentic, I guess, similar to the southern ovals during the cricket matches. Now, for the first time after the breaking of the drought, some real feed, some real tonnage per hectare was being achieved. The response after the rain was spontaneous. It took very little time for the germination to take place, and this was contrary to some of the so-called experts who claimed that and had made recommendations to the government that the country in the Alice Springs area should be shut down for 50 years because all the seed had blown away. But of course that was proved totally wrong and inaccurate. That's the 16 mile running full flood. The Tropic of Capricorn, inundated with beautiful water. And that's the 15 mile and the 16 mile joined together, and you might note there the telegraph line which was still in existence. And after the breaking of the drought, we installed some major dam works, and this was one of the dams, brand new dams that we'd put down. One was called Wee Ben, other one was called Moores Fire Dam. Wee Ben because it was put down the same year that Ben was born. Moores Fire Dam because Trevor Moore was the contractor who was sinking the dams, and it was the first fires. He called up on the radio at night and reported a fire up in the ranges behind Bulldust. No one could remember really ever there being any fires in the area because of the prolonged dry periods that had taken place, and certainly not the abundance of rain that we had in the 60s and the 70s to create such a huge tonnage on the ground. A sight to behold when you've got water like that through your flood out country. New fencing being erected in those areas. This is the Corkwood Yards, and this is some camels. We had a chap working for us who was very much into camels, and he used them later on in a film, Mad Max, down the south. Barry Elliott was his name. Barry used to come and assist us during musting time, but it wasn't uncommon for Barry to turn up 2 years later. He just sort of would skip a year and turn up the 2 years later, just walk in as though nothing had happened, and that just because he'd missed 1 year, that really wasn't very important. He was a great fellow. You can just see the huge growth of everything here, windmill grasses, button grass, just a prolific growth of grasses that hadn't been seen for decades because of the dry times. And as you can see, the huge bulk of tonnage that's just like wheat fields. Because of such huge tonnages on the ground, and we decided that we would purchase cattle from Queensland and the north. We actually purchased cattle from Carrandota and Alexandria. Alexandria, the Square A, we actually were told we were the first outsiders to purchase the Square A, which is the old Kidman brand. Since he'd sold the place, and the Carrandota was also an old Kidman place in Queensland, and so we brought those steers over and fattened them on these wonderful seasons that we were having. The bare patches are of interest because it's in the flood-out country, and actually they were in the very early storms we